Imagine you're standing in front of something you've always wanted, a car, a new phone, maybe even a house, and for a moment, it feels like the whole world is telling you to just go for it. But here's the thing. Millionaires don't think like that. They pause, they breathe, they ask the kind of quiet questions most people never slow down long enough to consider. And that's exactly why they stay wealthy, while everyone else stays stressed. By the end of this video, you'll understand the 6 silent habits millionaires use before buying anything, habits that could change your entire financial destiny. My name is Tony, and I spend way too much time thinking about how money, psychology, and emotion all collide, and how understanding that collision can change your life. If you're tired of vague financial advice and ready to see things differently, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button if this video opens your eyes. Now, here's something that will blow your mind. You ever notice how the most expensive mistakes in life happen in the moments when we don't slow down? It's strange the times we feel the most certain are often the times we should be the most careful. And that's exactly where this story begins. Millionaires have a habit that feels almost boring. Before buying anything from a pair of shoes to a car to a new piece of tech, they pause. A long, quiet, intentional pause. It's almost like they're checking in with a version of themselves the rest of us don't access very often. Here's the thing. Most people don't buy things, they buy feelings. A feeling of reward after a hard week. A feeling of, I deserve this. A feeling of, everyone else has it. Your brain releases dopamine the moment you imagine owning something long before you actually buy it. And that dopamine creates the illusion of urgency. Millionaires know this. They know the brain confuses desire with importance. So instead of moving faster, they slow everything down. Think about that for a second. They don't rely on willpower. They rely on space, the space between the impulse and the action. And within that space, every emotion becomes visible. The excitement, the fear of missing out, the insecurity, the boredom, the momentary need for comfort. You start to realize why impulsive spending feels so satisfying at first and so heavy right after. A study I read not too long ago said something interesting. Over 80% of non-essential purchases are made during emotional spikes, not logical ones, meaning most people aren't buying a thing, they're buying a temporary escape. Millionaires avoid this trap by doing something unbelievably simple. They delay, sometimes by a day, sometimes by a week, sometimes by a month. But they always give themselves enough distance to see the purchase for what it really is. Let me put it another way. Imagine you're standing inches away from a giant painting. All you can see is the color in front of your face. But the moment you step back, you see the whole picture. That's what the pause does. It turns a moment of emotional noise into a moment of clarity. And in that clarity, the truth shows up. Do I really want this? Or am I trying to feel something? Because here's the secret. Money is lost in fast decisions. Wealth is built in slow ones. During the pause, millionaires notice things most people miss. Hidden costs, emotional triggers, long-term consequences, lifestyle creep. They're not judging the purchase. They're judging the impact of the purchase. And the pause protects them from becoming someone who spends to feel better, someone who buys to keep up, someone who reacts instead of chooses. It's not about restriction, it's about alignment. And once you understand that, something powerful starts to shift inside you. Because slowing down doesn't just save money, it rewrites your entire relationship with desire. But here's where this gets even more interesting. Taking a pause isn't enough on its own. Millionaires don't just delay the decision. They use that space to ask the right questions. Questions that reveal whether a purchase is emotional or strategic. And once you learn those questions, your financial life will never feel the same again. You ever notice how the best decisions in life don't come from having more information, they come from asking better questions? Because once you pause, like we talked about in chapter 1, The next thing millionaires do is something most people never even think about. They interrogate the purchase softly, calmly, almost like a therapist asking themselves, okay, what's really going on here? See, most people ask weak questions like, can I afford this? Or, is this on sale? Millionaires ask questions that cut deeper. Here's the thing, your brain loves shortcuts. It loves easy answers. It loves the rush of yes. But millionaires know that saying yes without thinking is the fastest way to drift into a life built on emotional spending instead of intentional living. So they slow down and start asking the 6 questions that change everything. The first one is simple. Why do I want this? Not why do I think I want this? Not why do other people want this? But why do I actually want it? This is where emotional honesty shows up. Because sometimes the answer is, I'm bored, or I'm stressed, or I want to feel successful, or I don't want to feel left out. When you can name the emotion loses power. Then comes the next question, will this make my life better long term? Not just today, not just this weekend, but 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. Millionaires think like architects. Every purchase must support the structure of the life they're building. Middle-class buyers think like firefighters reacting to whatever desire feels hottest in the moment. Think about that for a second. The third question millionaires ask is, does this align with my goals? Not my impulses. Not my insecurities. Not my mood. My goals? Because the truth is, a person with goals spends differently than a person with cravings. There's a study I love. It found that when people tie purchases to identity, who am I becoming, instead of mood, what do I feel right now, impulsive spending drops by more than 60%. 60%. Just by shifting the question. That brings us to the fourth question. Will this purchase bring me peace or pressure? Millionaires value peace more than possessions. They'd rather delay gratification than buy something that adds stress, debt, or mental clutter. Most people buy the thing that excites them for 10 minutes and burdens them for 10 months. Millionaires reverse that. The fifth question is brutally honest. If no one saw me buy this, would I still want it? Ouch. Because this one exposes ego spending, image spending, and validation spending. It shows you how many purchases are made to impress people who aren't even paying attention. And finally, the sixth question, will this make me money, save me money, or improve my quality of life? If the answer is no to all three, the purchase usually isn't worth it. Here's the thing. These questions do more than stop bad purchases. They reveal the truth behind the purchase. They shift you from emotional thinking to strategic thinking. From reacting to choosing. From what feels good right now to what supports the future I'm building. Millionaires know that money doesn't disappear because of one big mistake. It disappears because of hundreds of tiny, unquestioned decisions. And once you adopt their questioning framework, it's like turning the lights on in a room you've walked through in the dark your whole life. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you're driving in dense fog. You can still move forward, but you're guessing, you're hoping, you're reacting. These questions, they're the fog lights. Suddenly the road becomes visible, the danger becomes obvious, the right choice becomes easier. And here's the beautiful part. When you start asking these questions consistently, something changes inside you. You stop being someone who manages money, and you become someone who leads it. Because questions shape decisions. And decisions shape destiny. But this leads us to something even more important. Even after asking all the right questions, millionaires still look at one more thing, the long-term cost most people never calculate. The silent price tag that hides behind the price tag. It's funny, we live in a world where almost every purchase feels like a right now decision. Right now it's on sale. Right now I need it. Right now it feels exciting. But millionaires think in a way that most people never practice they think in tomorrows. This chapter begins with a simple truth. The price tag is never the real cost. Most people calculate the cost of a thing by looking at the number on the label. Millionaires calculate the cost by looking at the number that never shows up, the number you only see after months or years have passed. Here's the thing. Your brain is wired for short-term comfort. It loves instant clarity. It loves simple math. But wealth is long-term math, and long-term math forces you to zoom out. Take something as basic as a cheap car. Most people think they got a deal because the upfront price was low. But millionaires look at the hidden layers: maintenance, insurance, fuel, repairs, depreciation, time spent at the mechanic, stress, opportunity cost. Suddenly, that cheap decision becomes one of the most expensive. Think about that for a second. There's a study from a major consumer research group that found something wild. People underestimate the total cost of ownership by an average of 38%, meaning nearly half of what you think something costs, you won't see until it's too late. Millionaires avoid this blind spot completely. Because they're not buying the object, they're buying the lifetime of the object. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you're standing on the shore looking at an iceberg. The part above the water looks small, manageable, harmless, but the part below the surface? That's the part that sinks ships. Purchases work the same way. Most of the cost sits below the surface, hidden from the excited, impulsive part of your brain. So millionaires ask a different set of questions. How much will this really cost me over the next 5 years? What does maintaining this do to my time, energy, and attention? What am I sacrificing to own this? What could this money grow into if I invested it instead? That last question, the opportunity cost, is the silent killer of wealth, because a $1,200 phone isn't a $1,200 phone. If invested for 10 years, it's a $3,000, $4,000 choice. A $40,000 car isn't a $40,000 car, it's a six-figure decision over a decade. And most people never realize they're trading thousands of future dollars for a momentary hit of excitement today. Here's the part people rarely talk about. Everything you own costs you twice once when you buy it, and again every single day you have it. It costs attention. It costs mental space. It costs time. It costs maintenance. It costs emotional bandwidth. Millionaires understand this deeply. That's why they buy fewer things, but better things. Things that last longer, break less, require less stress, and drain fewer resources. It's not about being cheap. It's about being intentional. And when you start thinking in long-term cost instead of upfront cost, your entire financial world flips. You stop chasing deals and start chasing durability. You stop buying distractions and start buying assets. You stop living in reaction and start living by design. But here's the twist. Even long-term cost isn't the final filter. Millionaires don't just ask, "What will this cost me?" They ask something even smarter. "What value will this give me?" Here's a strange truth that nobody really teaches you growing up. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. And the difference between those two things is the gap that quietly separates the wealthy from everyone else. Most people judge a purchase by the number on the tag because it feels simple, quick, and certain. Millionaires judge a purchase by the benefit it creates over time, and that requires slowing down, thinking deeper, and seeing beyond the surface. This chapter begins with a moment you've probably experienced. You're in a store, you see two versions of the same thing, one cheap, one expensive, and your brain instantly assumes the cheaper one is the smart choice. Why? Because your brain is wired to avoid immediate loss, not long-term regret. But millionaires have learned something important. Cheap decisions become expensive later. Valuable decisions become cheaper over time. Think about that for a second. A cheap pair of shoes that lasts 8 months is more expensive than a pricey pair that lasts 5 years. A low-cost appliance that breaks twice drains more time, stress, and repair money than a slightly better one. A discounted phone with slow performance wastes your energy every single day. See, poor and middle class buyers chase the feeling of saving money. Millionaires chase the reality of saving time, stress, and lifespan of use. Here's the thing: value isn't about luxury, value is about longevity. A research survey found that people who consistently buy the cheapest version of things end up spending about 23% more over a decade because they replace items more frequently. Meanwhile, those who buy for value end up spending less even when the upfront cost is higher. But value goes beyond durability. Millionaires look at value in 5 dimensions. Time saved. Does this help me spend less time fixing, maintaining, or stressing? Energy preserved. Does this simplify my life or complicate it? Longevity. How long until I need a replacement? ROI, or usefulness. How often will I actually use this? Mental clarity. Does owning this make my life calmer or noisier? When you run a purchase through these filters, the truth becomes obvious. Value isn't about what something costs, it's about what something gives. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine buying a house built on cheap materials. It looks fine on day one, but over the years, the cracks show. Problems deepen. What looked like a deal becomes a burden. Now, compare that to building a house on strong materials. It costs more at the start, but it gives you stability, peace, safety, longevity value that compounds quietly for decades. Purchases work the same way. Millionaires buy things the way architects build homes, for the future, not for the impulse. And here's the ironic part. When you prioritize value over price, you actually spend less money in the long run, because everything you buy returns value instead of draining it. This is where a powerful shift happens inside you. You stop asking, "How cheap can I get this?" and start asking, "How long will this serve me? How much peace does this add to my life? Does this improve who I'm becoming?" Because cheap things create chaos. Valuable things create clarity. But there's still something deeper millionaires do before buying anything. Something most people never even check. They evaluate their emotional state. Because even the smartest filters don't matter if the person using them is stressed, bored, lonely, or trying to impress someone. And that brings us to the emotional heart of the entire buying process. The part that decides whether the purchase is wise or self-sabotage. It's strange. You can do everything right on paper, compare value, calculate costs, ask smart questions, and still make a terrible financial decision. Why? Because money doesn't move when logic speaks. It moves when emotions whisper. This chapter begins in a moment all of us know too well. You're stressed, or bored, or lonely, or maybe you're trying to prove something to yourself or to someone else who isn't even paying attention. And suddenly, buying something feels like a tiny doorway out of that emotion. Here's the thing. Your brain has learned to use purchases as emotional shortcuts, a temporary relief, a moment of control, a spark of excitement. Millionaires understand this deeply, not because they're smarter, but because they felt the same emotional pull everyone else does. The difference is, they don't trust themselves when they're in a heightened state. They know the worst financial decisions happen in 5 emotional moments. When you're stressed, when you're sad, when you're bored, when you're trying to impress, when you're escaping discomfort. Think about that for a second. Most people don't buy an item, they buy a feeling. A new gadget isn't a gadget, it's a dopamine hit. A fancy dinner isn't a meal, it's a break from the emptiness. A luxury item isn't luxury, it's a bandage covering insecurity. There's a psychology study I love that found this. When people experience emotional discomfort, their likelihood of making an impulsive purchase increases by up to 250%. Not because they want the item, but because they want the emotion to stop. Millionaires avoid this trap not by resisting emotions, but by checking them. They ask quietly, Am I buying this or am I soothing something? Is this desire or is this escape? Would I still want this on a calm day? Those questions are small, but they hit hard. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine your mind is a lake. When the water is stormy, waves crashing, wind blowing, you can't see anything clearly beneath the surface. But when the water calms, the entire bottom becomes visible. Your desires become clear. Your needs become honest. Your decisions become wise. Millionaires wait for calm water because they know this simple truth. A purchase made in emotional turbulence is almost always regretted in emotional calm. And here's the hopeful part. Once you understand your emotional triggers, spending stops being reactive. You begin making choices from identity, not insecurity. From clarity, not impulse. From self-respect, not self-soothing. This is the emotional climax of the entire decision-making process. The moment where shame dissolves and self-awareness takes its place. Because the goal isn't to stop feeling emotions. The goal is to stop letting emotions make expensive decisions for you. But there's one final filter. Millionaires use a filter that ties everything together. Their vision, the long-term identity they're building, the future they're designing, the version of themselves they're becoming. And before they buy anything, they ask whether the purchase supports that vision, which is exactly where we're headed next. There's a calm moment right after the emotions settle where millionaires do something almost no one else does. They zoom out, not just from the purchase, but from their entire life. Because at the end of the day, every buying decision is really a direction decision. It nudges your life forward, or sideways, or backwards. It either strengthens the future you're building, or weakens it. Here's the thing. Most people make purchases based on the identity they have today. Millionaires make purchases based on the identity they're growing into. This chapter begins with a simple but powerful question millionaires ask themselves. Does this purchase support the life I'm building? It's not about deprivation. It's not about being cheap. It's about alignment. They know that every dollar is a vote for the person they want to become or the person they're trying to stop being. So they step back and look at the bigger picture. Will this move me closer to my long-term goals? Does this represent the values I want to live by? Is this consistent with the future version of me? Is this building my life or distracting me from it? Think about that for a second. The real wealth building habit isn't budgeting or investing or saving. It's identity alignment. Because when your purchases reflect your future instead of your feelings, your life starts to feel coherent, purposeful, intentional. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you're walking a long path through a forest. Every choice, every purchase is like choosing where to place your next stepping stone. If you place the stones randomly, you wander. If you place the stones with intention, you arrive. Millionaires don't wander. They build paths. And the more they reconnect with their bigger vision, the easier every decision becomes. The noise fades. The impulses weaken. The clarity strengthens. By the time they reach the checkout page, the decision is already made. Not by emotion, not by impulse, but by identity. And that is why they stay wealthy.